English translation, 238th, Contact, Part 3. Saturday, 18th of May, 1991. Rule 55 hours.
But now tell me, is it also known to you or your scientists when the first human life formed in the region of our Milky Way?
I can serve you with some information about that. According to our research and according to the information from the Arahat Athersata level, the first humans, in their original form, came into being on the oldest planetary systems nearly 28,000 years ago, after which, then, about 27,000 years ago, the first physically recognizable humans emerged from them quite certainly as the life forms named hominids, which, however, first appeared very much later on the Earth.
Aha. And therefore that means that, until now, no human life forms whatsoever in our Milky Way system could have developed as far as those only in the form of the fluctuating High Council. Not to mention also then being able to enter into a higher level, as for example in the Arahat Athersata level. As is generally known, it indeed takes 60,000 to 80,000 years until the form of spirituality is reached, which leads to the Arahat Athersata level, which comprises the first pure spirit level. But now the question remains open. Where did, for example, Nokodemion come from, who not only established and engendered new peoples, rather he also created new peoples, who he then equipped with an advanced knowledge? It is generally indeed known that Nokodemion knows an age of 86,000 years. Later corrections state Nokodemion to be about 7.6 billion years old. That is to say 7,600,000, and his oldest created peoples 20,900,000 years. This number is also not correct. Editor CM does not have exact number, probably more like 20,900,000. Therefore, he can certainly not stem from this Milky Way system, nor can the old Lyrans and their direct ancestors, nor can the Playaran. The first genuinely recognizably human forms of life were created on the oldest planets of our Milky Way system about 9,000 to 12,000 years ago. And before these then became real humans, who could really be designated human, certainly yet nearly another 1,000 years passed, or perhaps even more. Therefore, Nokodemion and his peoples could never have stemmed from the Milky Way system. So from where did he and his peoples come?
This question also occupied us. So we asked the Arahat Athersata level, who explained to us that Nokodemion was a creation of the planet Sadar, which was in the Warren Sun system, which moved in the Lyran galaxy, 3,816,000 light-years distant from the SOL system.
You said it moved. Then does it no longer exist?
The Lyran galaxy also went the eternal way of coming into being and passing away. It dissolved itself and turned into energy, out of which new stars and planets and a new galaxy came into being. This happened 26,000 years ago, which is why Nokodemion left the homeworlds with his peoples prior to that and settled on the worlds of the Lyra and Vega star systems. However, shifted a little and only about a fraction of a second from the present time. So Nokodemion and his peoples, therefore, came very far out of the depths of the universe and settled themselves in the oldest space-shifted system area of the Milky Way galaxy. However, this was already Nokodemion's third exodus, because before he established or created his peoples on the planet Sadar, he came from other galaxies and planets that were older than the Lyran galaxy, and which also passed into the way of decay. But he established, engendered and created his peoples shortly before he became a purely spiritual form, whereby he attained that form at 58 billion years. Later corrections state 58 million years, which today the High Council possesses, in order to then likewise rapidly transform to the Arahat Athersata level. He spent several billion years there before he again took on a material body to create order among his peoples and to give the creational laws and recommendations attention, because his peoples had Osartetan gotten very badly out of the control of their good human nature. Thus he came back out of the Arahat Athersata spirit level for the sake of his peoples, who did not follow the creational laws and recommendations at all to bring his peoples to reason and therefore to rationality. That was 12,000, later corrections state 12,000 years ago. As he had to recognize his people's lack of understanding, he decreed a logical use of force because the human beings were so degenerate that their senses and aspirations were only after boundless power by all murderous means. Uniformly, as one, the peoples had the audacity to violently spread out in the universe, and autocratically and usurpingly called themselves representatives of the creation. An insane idea that they had already tried to actualize, in that they attacked foreign planetary systems, bestially murdered millions of human beings or slapped them in chains and enslaved them. Thus Nokodemion was faced with the choice of leaving his peoples to degenerate into universal monsters or command a halt to their murderous and power-hungry actions. Naturally, he decided to command a halt. Accordingly, he issued his decree. This was based on his sense of justice and his loyalty to the creation. Accordingly, he sought a solution which was anchored in the powers of the creational laws and recommendations. First, in the course of only a few decades, he established gigantic armies which were exclusively of an android nature. Then he armed them with all conceivable weapons and robots, whereby hard-hitting armies arose, sworn singly and alone to Nokodemion's high command. The individual leadership of the individual armies was ultimately taken over and accomplished by captains and war veterans from various planets, whose governments allied and defended themselves against the criminal and ruthlessly murdering conquerors. With these war-experienced ones and leaders, stemming from many different planets, and together with the robots and weapons built with the help of governments, and with the androids, Nokodemion constructed a multinational peacekeeping troop, so veterans instantly appeared everywhere and fought the criminal conquerors or imprisoned them, where these led their conquering campaigns. Within less than 8 years, all of the criminal peoples were in the custody of multinational peacekeeping troops, deported to a distant planet that was hermetically barricaded and guarded so that nobody could escape, even if anyone possessed flying machines capable of space travel. In conformity with the law of logical force, Nokodemion issued the decree that both sexes of the peoples were ordained to sterility in a lawful and humane form. And thus the order and decree was passed, through the engagement of the Arahat Athersata level, that those who passed away in the course of time to a natural death should not be ordained a reincarnation. Rather, that their spirit forms had to stay as long in the realm of the other side until they, one day, through a new decree of Nokodemion, could again find an existence in human bodies. However, this had to continue for a very long time and, in addition, led thereto that almost all knowledge had to escape out of the storage banks of all personalities, and new personalities were created through the overall consciousness block. Thus, this process of exhausting the greatest part of all the knowledge stored in the storage banks continued for almost 4,000 TBC years before Nokodemion, with the help of the Arahat Athersata level, again called the aforementioned spirit forms, and newly ordered them into human bodies, and indeed in his newly engendered and created peoples who found their origins 8,000, later corrected. 8,000 years ago on Laysan. That, my friend, is the answer to your question, yet that may all indeed be known to you.
Perhaps yes. But now, since the entire knowledge out of the storage banks was not exhausted, which corresponded to the intention, naturally some soon broke through again, and over 8,000 later corrected. 8,000 years later, there was again, as ever, a stink. Not only that an Ishwish, god, king of wisdom, created the Ring Nebula in his megalomania, which has since then been named the Eye of God, but his most distant descendants finally also came to Earth and terrorized this world here, and so on, which, at any rate, as a rough measure, happened essentially for the first time only 389,000 years ago, when one disregards those deportations and conquests and other skirmishes that go back to around 20,000 years ago.
Indeed, I knew that you know the connections. You have surely only wanted to test how familiar I am with this story myself.
That was not quite so, my friend.
It appeared so to me.
But it was not so. But yet a question about the first human beings on the Earth. From which point in time can one speak of terrestrial primal humans effectively as higher developed hominids?
The point of time moves around from about 4,800,000 to 8,000 years.
Therefore, very much more than the Earth scientists accept. They indeed reckon with only about 2,500,000 years, in the highest case with 3,000 years.
I know that the terrestrial scientists and researchers are in error in this regard, as well as in many other things.
Nicely put, now. But yet something in regard to Nokodemion's peoples. Essentially, he indeed twice imposed on himself the mission to engender and create peoples. And indeed once in that fluctuating material state in which he found himself, that today the High Council also possess. I mean therewith the fluctuating condition between coarse matter and fine matter form. Thereafter, Nokodemion moved to the first stage of the purely spiritual form, and indeed to the Arahat Athersata level. Nokodemion established his first peoples at the age of a total of 50,500,000, later corrected. 50,500,000 years in this form, that he engendered a lineage which then independently further increased itself. As he then entered the transitional level of the fluctuating material state at the age of 58,000, later corrected. 58,000 years he created there, through spiritual potency, a further people, after which he seemingly spent precisely 2,000 years in the transitional level. Thereafter he remained for a further 4,000 years in that level, after which he shifted in a rapid manner and entered the Arahat Athersata level, where he remained during the next 10,000 years, before he determined, as a result of the Ausartungen, having gotten very badly out of control of their good human natures of his begotten and created peoples, and in unanimous accord with the entire Arahat Athersata level, to change himself back into a material human life form, in order in this way to command a halt to his degenerated, criminal, usurping peoples, and to bring them to reason. Thus, 12,000, 12 million years ago, he came back into the coarse matter universe out of the Arahat Athersata level in order to fulfill his mission. But his return meant for him that a new evolutionary course of 60,000 to 80,000, later corrected to 40 to 60 million years was ordained, entirely in accordance with the creational laws and recommendations, with all the suffering, pain, and need, and all things which also, through the creationally determined given course of evolution, belong to every other human life form. Nokodemion himself was entirely conscious of this, yet in spite of that, he decided to take this step. Accordingly, therefore, because his sense of duty was so pronounced that he knew the obligation which he took upon himself with the engendering and creation of his peoples, who he had to again bring onto the correct path of the recognition and fulfillment of their duty to the creation and its laws and recommendations, and regarding all life. Therefore, Nokodemion now lives a second series of material lives and reincarnations, in order therein to resolve a material part of life into purely spiritual form for a second time and enter into the Arahat Athersata level, which appeared to him more as the real homeland, the longer he was in a material life.
It has been clear to me for a long time that you know much more about these events than I myself, or indeed any one of us. And your allusion to the Arahat Athersata level as Nokodemion's homeland, that I can fully understand. Nokodemion must feel very foreign and uncommonly lonely on the worlds and through all the times which have passed. In our coarse matter universe, even if humans from his own peoples, engendered and created from him, who he loves and who love him, stand at his side. But he will certainly remain a stranger for all times, and lonely as well, which will only be alleviated when he returns again to his real homeland in the Arahat Athersata level. For my part, I do not and would never want to have to take up his position, which also certainly no reasonable person would ever want, if he knows Nokodemion's history. Also with our people, who are likewise indeed the distant descendants of Nokodemion's engendered and created ones, you would never find anyone who would want to take his position. Of that I am absolutely certain. For my part, feelings of sorrow sometimes move inside me for him when I think about him and recognize that he must be arranged into yet almost a further 50,000 correction, 50 million years of his self-chosen duty and uncountable reincarnations before he again has the possibility to return to his real homeland, which he constantly misses.
A powerful speech, my dear friend Peta. If Nokodemion has, however, already withstood uncountable reincarnations during his first 58,000 correction, 50 million years of comprehensive coarse matter development, and therefore also the uncountable reincarnations of the last 12,000 correction, 12 million years, then he would still accomplish the remaining 47,000 to 48,000 correction, 47 to 48 million years.
Sentiments speak through you that demand respect and reverence from me.
It would be better if we ended this topic now. There would also be other things to bring up, such as Boris Yeltsin, who wants to push Mikhail Gorbachev out of his position, and once again the people are stupid enough not to realize that Yeltsin is just a power-hungry intriguer, as you said. He is still secretly and deceitfully agitating against Gorbachev, but this will certainly change when he believes that his time has come. In this respect, it would have me now wondering when this time will be.
That is already clear. Boris Yeltsin will present his claims to power for the first time on Monday, the 28th of October, 1991, in the Russian parliament in Moscow. His blind followers, however, will not recognize the core of the matter, namely that Yeltsin is only concerned with power and the domination of Russia. This is his desire, and the masses who have fallen in love with him will believe him and support him in his greed for power.
Gorby will have to expect a lot more. But that can hardly be changed. What else will happen in the world?
Around the same days, when Boris Yeltsin will assert his claims to power, it turns out that a devastating typhoon haunts the Philippines, which is given the name Ruth. Between the 18th and 25th of October, Indonesia is hit by a strong earthquake, after which the volcano Mount Lokan on the island of Sulawesi begins to erupt. In contrast to the earthquake in India, which will be of tectonic origin, the earthquakes in Indonesia and the volcanic eruption are based on indirect effects of atomic bomb tests in the Mururoa area, where the French criminally carry out such tests.
These French again. They are as bad and criminal as the Americans. But here is a question. Is it perhaps true that the volcano erupted years ago, triggered the devastating catastrophe in direct or indirect connection with the atomic bomb tests in Nevada? I mean Mount St. Helens.
This is unfortunately true because indirect influences of the atomic bomb tests were the causes of the massive eruption. However, not only the Mount St. Helens volcano, but also the large volcanic eruption in Southern America led back to the same cause.
You mean where a whole town was buried under a volcanic mudslide and all human beings died there?
That is what I speak about.
But the Americans will still not be able to understand and continue to carry out their criminal and murderous nuclear bomb tests.
This will, unfortunately, be the case, even if those responsible in Russia will, for the time being, refrain from further such attempts. The American leaders are uncompromising, murderous, and criminal towards the planet, the entire fauna and flora, and towards the entire human race, as are the French in relation to nuclear tests. In arrogance, self-righteousness, and unscrupulous criminality against all life, no other country on earth surpasses America and those responsible there who have no respect or reverence for life, nor their subordinates and those who obey them. Nevertheless, there are also murderous and criminal human beings in other countries who are sometimes much worse, and who are also supported by the lowly intelligent ones of the whole world, as is the case with Israel, for example, where certain Zionists and nationalists, etc., can openly murder human lives without being called to account.
Exactly, but it is no wonder there, because even the government is equipped with criminals, as Quetzal and Simyase have always said. You have told me about it in private on several occasions. According to your statements, which I in no wise doubt, not only Moshe Dayan was a war criminal and in Israel a multiple murderer, but also others, such as Sharon and Begin, who many years ago or decades ago were terrorists and murderers in Israel and in the world outside, who knew no scruples and murdered human beings themselves, who belonged to the peace commissions or who otherwise tried to achieve peace. They were murderous terrorists in the same manner as today's Israeli boss, Shamir, and many others who still bear familiar names.
We never really wanted to speak openly about this, so that these facts would not be reflected in the contact reports.
We have already discussed a lot of other things that were also unpleasant or dangerous in reference to a publication. On the other hand, I think that we should talk about it in the contact reports in order to tell the human beings the truth.
Of course, your words are true, but they are still very dangerous, which does not exactly contribute to your safety. The arm of the murderous and criminal Israeli Secret Service Mossad reaches very far, and this organization of the legalized crime knows no scruples. But precisely in the context you mentioned, it can be explained that at the end of October or the beginning of November, a so-called Middle East Peace Conference will take place in Madrid, in Spain, under the patronage of President Gorbachev, the already largely disintegrated USSR and US President Bush, who will, however, play more of a minor role of image maintenance. This conference, however, will not bring any success apart from the fact that such a conference comes at all. The Israelis will continue on their dogmatic, criminal, despising of human rights and might-hungry line and make no concessions whatsoever to any demands. So the conference will end without any success for peace. The only prospect will be that the conference can be repeated, but elsewhere. There is, however, a great deal of uncertainty in all things, with radical and conservative forces also being involved in fomenting this uncertainty, while other forces will also play a decisive role in threatening and endangering the human beings attending the conference with death, murder, and manslaughter, and with destruction. The greatest danger of failure, however, will come from the radical and conservative blood-ravaged elements, including Sharon, Yitzhak Shamir, and many other top bosses and their supporters.
Then it also is not worthwhile that we have to say more words about it here. Maybe we could talk about something else, for example about the planet Venus, because last year the Americans once again shot up a probe, which is called Magellan or something similar. Now I would wonder what this space probe will find on Venus. After those occurrences, when practically all sand and all dust were sucked off the surface of Venus and torn out into the world space by a suction jet of a black hose. Is it perhaps possible that you could describe to me what the Venus surface has looked like since then?
Certainly. For this will soon no longer be a secret for the Earth humans. Today's planet Venus, as it is called by Earth humans, is still a very young planet, only 3.04 billion 340,000 years old, although the uppermost layers of the planet's surface are only 976 million years old. This is because they were and are formed by the ancient, permanent, and still present volcanism of the planet. As a former satellite of the solar system Uranus, 830.5 years ago, calculated backwards from today, it was torn out of its orbit by the traveling planet destroyer and brought in tow by the giant to its present orbit around the sun, as my daughter Simya Se explained to you in 1975. She also explained to you then that it would soon be proven that all those swindlers, liars, and cheaters who claim that Venus carries material human or spiritual life would soon be exposed to be lying. This proof will now be provided towards the end of this year by the probe you have named, which will also reveal the grand swindle of the arch-fraudster George Adamski, who is unfortunately called the father of ufology. Unfortunately, the fact that the truth about Venus is revealed and that there are no forms of life, either material or spiritual, will not dissuade the fanatics, sectarians, and believers from continuing to believe in the swindler Adamski and from defending his great fraud and his lies. As far as the planet itself is concerned, the incident with the arm of the black tube has caused all sand and dust to spread in one direction or evaporate into space, thus revealing the actual surface of the planet. This surface consists mainly of older and very old lava fields. Because the planet was volcanic early on and littered with volcanoes, so to speak, above and below the surface, together with many craters of meteor impacts. While at first only elevations of about 1 to 2,500 meters could be recognized, after the distribution and volatilization of the sand and dust, mountains became visible as well as old or still active volcanoes, which tower up to 10,000 meters into the nitrogen-carbon dioxide atmosphere. There are also whole mountain ranges that you might compare with the Andes on Earth.
And there are no canals like on Mars?
Of course, there are too, only in another form and about 7,000 kilometers long.
Well, if I understood you correctly, then is Venus still volcanically active?
I explained that with my words.
Either Simya-se or Quetzal said, and once explained that by the disappearance of the sand and dust, of which a lot of volcanic ash is said to have been volcanic ash, also plateaus should have appeared, so to speak.
That corresponds to correctness.
Thank you. Could you now tell me something about the future?
I can do that. The Philippines will be hit by a very severe typhoon and many thousands of lives will be lost. This will happen around the turn of the month, from October-November. The time for this cannot yet be determined very precisely for certain reasons. Only a short time later, a second typhoon will threaten the Philippines, which will be called Seth, and then a third storm called Wilma will follow. They will mark the first typhoon with the name Thelma. Only shortly after the first storm, several more severe earthquakes are registered in Switzerland. For example, on Wednesday, the 20th of November in the Rhine Valley, whereby the epicenter will be near Thusis, while the next day the Valais will be hit by an earthquake. These two quakes, which will be followed by others, and which will be followed by many aftershocks, are tectonic quakes caused by the so-called Africa Plate, which collides with the North Europe Plate and will cause a lot of disaster in the near future. Although it is to be feared that underground atomic bomb experiments on other continental plates, such as in America, Russia, Arabia, and in the Mururoa Atoll, may help to complete even larger catastrophes directly or indirectly. Fortunately, there is not much to fear for the next two earthquakes in Switzerland, apart from minor material damage. So there is no reason for excitement, even if they will be quite noticeable earthquakes of 3 to 6 magnitude.
That is a joyous message, but what events, etc., are worth mentioning? Besides, what is it about the fact that Earth scientists always claim that mosquitoes are not able to transmit AIDS? We have already talked about AIDS, but this question remains open. In my opinion, all bloodsuckers should be able to transmit AIDS, whether mosquitoes or vampire bats or parasitic flies, etc.
Your assumption is correct in every respect. However, you forgot the cats and a few other animals, which we do not want to mention for reasons of panic. However, it is not the animals and insects that are the main forces behind the spread of the epidemic, but humankind itself, now through the group of heterosexuals in increased numbers and through blood donations. This is in contrast to before, when fixers and homosexuals were the main culprits. Thus, most AIDS-infected heterosexuals are also found today. A further prediction arises for Russia, where the October Revolution parade on Red Square in front of the Kremlin will be canceled for the first time, while then Boris Yeltsin, as president of Russia, will try to put his power-hungry desires into practice by wanting to impose a state of emergency on the Chechen Republic because they will be of a different mind than Yeltsin. The state of emergency, however, will not be in the sense of the Russian parliament, whereby Yeltsin's greed for power will suffer a defeat. This will not, however, prevent this would-be dictator from continuing to pursue his course of unrestricted power, even if it means revolution, civil war, and a new coup d'etat. But perhaps Shevardnadze can do something about it, and Gorbachev will appoint him back to office.
That was bound to happen. That was to be feared from the very beginning. Unfortunately, there is certainly nothing we can do about it, is there?
No change for the better should be possible anymore.
That is what I said. Then something different again. As we know, the stars and planets in our space-time structure are still very young, by which I mean the Pleiades that we can see from Earth. The suns and planets there are still so young that they cannot even carry the lowest forms of life, let alone that the spiritual spheres of the stars and planets there already contain energies of future new spiritual forms. Does this really correspond to reality?
Your question seems very illogical to me because you know the facts you just mentioned very well.
I just wanted your confirmation once more that this is really what I said. Consequently, neither material humans nor any spirit forms or other life forms on the Pleiades known to terrestrial humans can maintain any contacts of a psychological, spiritual, physical, conscious, sentimental, or emotional or telepathic nature with Earth humans.
That is correct, because if no life forms exist on stars or planets, neither in material nor subtle, nor even pure spiritual manner, then no contact can be maintained with such non-existent non-existences. So I do not quite understand your question.
I simply want to point out that so many so-and-so confused ones on the Earth still claim, and the longer the more, that they have contact with humans or spirit forms, etc. of the Pleiades. For example, the liar BF, then the South American or Mexican C and the Mexican professor anyway, Then also the actress M, with whom we had quite bad experiences. But also G.G. Chirm, who wants to maintain contact with a Pleiades commander Hatun, then PM, or as they are called, and many others, such as RB and the super channeler GCM and so forth.
They all fall under the names of liars, swindlers, and fraudsters.
I know that, but my question and speech does not really get that far. But it refers to the star system, which is shifted by a fraction of a second to our time and space. All the liars, swindlers, and deceivers, as well as the sick and lunatics, do not know what you call your star system. In order to make it clear to the Earth humans from where you come, we always said until now that you would come from the Pleiades, which is why we always spoke of this cluster of stars, also in reference to your home system, which is shifted to our space-time level. So your space-time structure is a fraction of a second shifted to ours, which means so much that on your Pleiades you are living in a completely different space-time structure than we are here in the SOL system, although you are materially aligned as we are here in our space-time structure. Now the actual question, is it possible that Earth humans are so far evolutionary that they could break through the split-second space-time barrier between our and your space-time structure consciously, telepathically, or spirit telepathically, in order to maintain contact with humans or spirit forms, etc., from your space-time structure?
That applies with absolute certainty only in one case, and that is with you. Otherwise, no human or material life form lives on Earth that would be capable of such contacts through the space-time barrier. Almost 3 millennia will pass before the first humans on Earth will be able to do this. You are the only true exception, but there are reasons for this that go back billions of years into the past and cannot be understood by all the contact liars and other swindlers and deceivers.
A clear answer. Then the next question, do you know if any of your people constantly, periodically or sporadically change from your space-time structure into our space-time structure to do any work, or to maintain contact with human beings from the Earth? Whereby I do not mean you and all those who have to do with me or in relation to the mission, however it would be extremely interesting to know how many they are.
I can fully answer your question. In this or in your space-time structure, there are at the moment 16 persons each in a fixed cycle, who are on Earth as mission-related and missionary representatives and who are exchanged in a fixed cycle. Of these 16 human beings, not a single one maintains any contacts of any kind with the Earth humans or with human beings who live on Earth and who came to Earth from other planets at earliest times. In addition to these, I am the only one left with my entourage of 122 and 406 other human beings, who, however, apart from me without exception, would not maintain any kind of contact whatsoever with Earth humans, neither in a short-term nor in a long-term form.
Note Ptah from 16.9. 2004, the 122,406 persons in Ptah's entourage are the crew of his great spacer.
For my part, I maintain the only contact on the Earth with your person. Until the year 1986, there were 718 persons of our home worlds and of our Federation in 3 different stations in total on the Earth. But also among them, not a single member maintained any contacts to any human beings on Earth, except to you. Otherwise, no human beings from our space-time structure come into your space and into your time. Consequently, never any contacts of any kind could be maintained by such persons.
Then you have the absolute control over it. If any humans from your space-time structure would come into our time and into our space, as you would have then also an absolute monitoring of it, if such human beings of you or of your Federation would have contacts with the Earth humans.
This is the state of affairs and the truth. The only person on the Earth who is in contact with us in truthful form is you alone. No one and no person on the earth except yourself has any contact with us or any of our allies, whether physical, telepathic, or otherwise. They who claim otherwise lie and deceive obviously and unrestrainedly. Everything will become more and more evil in this respect, because already the first course has been set for lying contact assertions also in the European area. The few in Europe who have claimed so far that they are in contact with me or with my daughter, or with other human beings from our worlds, as the liars in America and South America also claim, will not be the only ones in the future. Because already groups and individuals are preparing to commit big lies and scams also in the European area in the sense that they will claim that they are in contact with me or with my daughter or with other human beings of our peoples. Especially in Germany and Poland as well as in Russia and in different Union states, such webs of lies and deceits are unfortunately invented by irresponsible elements and by delusional illnesses, which does not mean, however, that these lying, deceitful machinations will remain limited to these countries, because truthfully in all countries of Europe the same will arise, whereby particularly Italy and France, as well as Spain, Australia, and Japan, together with America in this kind, will make lying and deceitful talk of themselves. Particularly starting from the month of November, such criminal machinations will increase, unfortunately.
So the whole theater of lies and fraud also spreads to the so-called Eastern Bloc countries, if one can then still speak of an Eastern Bloc, which should no longer be right.
Of course. But the same will also happen in Arabia and in Israel, as well as in Africa, even if it will take a little longer for the same lies, deceits and charlatanries to appear there, which unfortunately cannot be prevented, because sectarianism is spreading more and more among the earthly human beings, and everything sensible is inundated and slowly threatened to be destroyed. As Emmanuel already predicted about 2,000 years ago, as you well know.
Of course I know that. But it is also clear to me that sectarianism is the main factor in the prophecy of the number or beast 666, namely the main factor of the anti-logos, or even of the Antichrist, as the religious call this truth-killing. In the Open Word, Figu publication, I already wrote years ago that for this occult and religious sectarianism, the greatest blame must be laid on the religions and the pseudosciences of parapsychology and Esai fanatics, who breed dizziness, incomprehension, lies and deception and charlatanism to a great extent, by paving the way for all swindlers, liars, deceivers, psychopaths, schizophrenics and deluded ones, by recognizing mediums of all kinds, spiritual healers, channelers, contactors of all shades, spirit and demon summoners, exorcists, the inspired and other sick or swindlers, liars and deceivers as real and paving the way for them. Unfortunately, there is more than enough evidence to show that through the guilt of parapsychology, which has become a malignant disease of modern times, occult and religious sectarianism has been promoted and will continue to be promoted until everything overflows and the prophecy is fulfilled that all those who seek and represent the truth will be persecuted and killed, just as it is written in the prophecy of the Talmud Emmanuel.
Unfortunately, this is the truth, and the increased worldwide appearance of the fraudulent contact liars announces the first contractions of the coming, which will result from the equally worldwide and frightening sectarianism which the sectarian houses have fundamentally cultivated in Protestant and Catholic churches.
These are things that have been known for a long time, but which unfortunately cannot yet be changed for the time being. The lying and deceitful churches of Christianity have an act of violence in relation to lies, deceit, charlatanry, and etc., which cannot be found anywhere else in the universe, but also the lying, deceitful, dizzying, and charlatanic violence of the Americans, who in 1969 fooled, lied, and deceived the whole world when they launched the theater with the alleged moon landing of Neil Armstrong and his companions, fades away. by hermetically sealing off a fictitious moon landing somewhere in a desert on a suitable site and in a prepared hall months before and recording it on videotapes, whereby the later alleged moon drivers played along with this deception. Then when the would-be astronauts thundered the Earth outside with their rocket and circled it many times in the space capsule, the videotapes with the faked moon landing were sent by satellite to Cape Kennedy, where all employees stared just as spellbound at the screens as billions of human beings all over the world who were cheated and deceived just like the employees in Cape Kennedy and all Americans. And this worldwide deception was only about straightening out the image of the Americans lost in Vietnam, and also about putting the Soviet Union at a disadvantage, so that they would not appear as the first to enter the moon and lay claim to the moon. If I remember correctly, it was just 37 human beings who were involved in this worldwide deception, of which those responsible are still proud and claim that they had rendered America an immeasurably great service, which caused many misguided and criminal dispositions, and which did not take the truth so seriously.
That is correct. However, everything is lyingly presented differently.
Neil Armstrong then dropped the big words when he set his foot in the sand of a desert, when he roughly said, "A small step for me, but a big step for mankind." He could walk really well, because his step was really only tiny if you consider that he did not leave America at all to put his foot in the dust, which allegedly lay on the moon in July 1969. But the sun will bring the lie to light, because even if the 37 participants, in which Werner von Braun is also said to have participated, are really silent, everything will not be concealed for all eternity. But one of the participants will speak one day, either for reasons of conscience or as a drunkard or otherwise. But perhaps other circumstances will also lead to the uncovering of the truth, as you indicated at that time. But let us leave that, because I still have some questions if you can answer them for me. We spoke earlier about the contact liars, whereby you only mentioned yourself and Simya-se as well as other persons from the Pleiades. I assume that it is not just a lie that contact is supposed to be maintained with you, Pliaran. In my opinion, it should also be the case that alleged contacts with alleged human beings or powers, etc., from other stars also appear, right?
Of course, this will be so. Strangely enough, however, all contact liars and sick ones as well as delusional believers have been concentrating more and more on us, who come from the Pleiades, for several years now. But that it is impossible for all of the Earth humans except you. First of all, to enter into any physical or telepathic or any other kind of contact with us, or, secondly, to penetrate our space-time structure in any manner, is unknown to all contact liars and sick human beings as well as delusional ones, and also absolutely incomprehensible, because they are trapped and caught in delusional heresies of esoteric occult parapsychological machinations.
I always rejoice, friend Ptah, when I hear you speak with words that correspond to my impression, that I have made together, or that I use in the form of my mission fulfillment, and very often repeat according to the principle that constant repetition achieves urgency.
Exactly. This is also the reason why I have been trying for quite some time to move away from our use of language and expression and to use only your words, word creations, and manner of speaking, because many years of studies have brought us the result that your words and word creations, as well as your kind and wise of naming all things by name, and also the manner of your relentless presentation of the truth in an aggressive form, are the one and only way to wake up the human beings on Earth, to teach them the truth and to make them reflect on it.
That almost raises my self-confidence, my friend, when I consider that many lurkers and other truth-unlovers, scroungers, wannabe diplomats, sycophants and sectarians, etc., take offense at my language and my expressions and word formations and believe that they have to reprove me for this, with the idiotic and self-opinionated assertion that I am not capable of a fine and educated language, often only because they themselves are far too cowardly and too dirty to call the truth by its real name. no matter if they are also offensive names for a certain scum of humans who can no longer be named with a good conscience by fine names and fine titles. But these would-be critics and other know-it-alls and slime-suckers do not understand that only the thinking and acting and the bad character of these human beings, who have gotten very badly out of control of their good human natures, are branded with offensive names and designations, without the person, as such, being attacked. For they have fallen into the false teaching that one must be condemned for a lousy deed in and of himself, which they also do extensively if someone steps on their toes or if they simply have to judge another human being for any deed. So they do not then judge, but make a judgment and punish a person with it, without him or her having the slightest possibility of making good the mistake they have made. For my part, however, I do not condemn any human being, for I judge them only on the basis of all the necessary aspects in order to then find a judgment. But there is really nothing to be said against this, or against the fact that I also use certain terms for a person. For example, lout, crook, clerical twit, assassins or beast, etc., if they think and act according to the terms. Nevertheless, however, I respect the life of such a person as a creation-given one, as a venerable and respectful one. By this I mean that I respect every human being as such, regardless of whether his or her actions are good or evil. What I denounce are always only the negative acts in thinking and acting.
I am well aware of this, and you may well be the only person on the earth who thinks, acts, and judges in this wise. Shamefully, however, I must admit that even we ourselves have not yet progressed so far in the evolution in this form that we would be fully on a par with your actions in this regard. We are probably in the beginning, but we are not able to draw any comparisons to you, unfortunately. Our regret about this weakens when we consider that you are of a completely different and much older origin than all of us. But with regard to the fact that you are accused and insulted of not being able to speak fine language, this can only be the foolish, audacious prejudgment of stupid and self-referential human beings who are unable to recognize their own. Inadequacy and stupidity in self-glorification and self-adulation, and their indulgence in megalomania. Not to mention the many very finely written articles that you have written in the course of your life, as well as letters that have brought deepest joy and love feelings and new courage to countless human beings. You have also cloaked your fairy tales in words that will never be proper for those to speak or write who offend your language and manner of writing. This, along with several comprehensive writings of instructive form, which you have written for our peoples in the course of your life, along with adventurous travel descriptions, etc., which are extremely popular with our peoples, and of which no earthling has the slightest idea. This is no disgrace to you? Quite the contrary. You deserve the greatest thanks and honor and respect for everything, dear friend.
All right, let us leave it. Earlier we spoke of the Americans, who, with the alleged moon landing in the year 1969, made fools of their entire population and the entire world. That was indeed not the only time, as you explained to me that time on the Great Voyage, and about which I was to remain silent. Now, it deals, thereby, with the events on the 7th of December 1941, as the Japanese executed the great attack on the Hawaiian harbor, Pearl Harbor, whereby the flagship Arizona and many other American ships sank and thousands of humans were killed. You told me then, in 1975, that I was not permitted to speak about the actual occurrences until the events reached the 50th year memorial. On the coming 7th of December this year, it will be so far along that the events of that time lie 50 years ago.
That corresponds to that which is correct. Therefore, now these evil machinations of the Americans can be spoken about.
Good, if I still remember correctly. You explained to me at that time that, through their spies and through the CIA, the American government was fully comprehensively informed that the Japanese Air Force would attack the American fleet in Pearl Harbor in the early morning hours on the 7th of December 1941, and would certainly destroy it. This would happen practically without the Americans' resistance, because they were not at all interested in a defense. According to your explanation, those responsible, in the American government of that time, quite consciously sacrificed thousands of Marines and others belonging to the Army, as well as their flagship Arizona and many other ships, and with the intention, on one hand, to have a convincing basis for attack against Japan in order to be able to carry out official atom bomb tests on real objects, for which the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were sought out, and secondly, to prove their war power and greatness, when they atomically destroyed 2 cities and annihilated hundreds of thousands of human lives with only 2 bombs, and made many cripples and programmed birth defects, on which their scientists could then drive forward relevant studies. Therefore, the then American government and the initiated scientists, military and other kinds of criminals, quite consciously sent their own people to death. Let an entire fleet be destroyed and committed a war crime without compare with the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and with the murdering of hundreds of thousands of humans, as well as their mutilation and evoked birth defects, without the truth being known until now in the public world, and without the Americans having been brought to justice for that, as it was also with many other cases of war crimes and crimes against humanity, which the Americans have committed.
That is what I spoke about then. That is correct. But the truth about the Americans will also, however, not simply fade away. Rather, it will strive for the light, whereby sooner or later their atrocities will also be exposed, even if they are so shrouded and made secret and, in the denying of truth, are initially always managed in silence.
You have said that correctly and skillfully once again, so we do not have to say more about that either. I am also interested in other things, such as the fact that although you do not maintain any contacts with Earthlings or other human beings of any origin on Earth, you send out one-sided impulses to certain human beings on the Earth which are received and evaluated. We also call these impulse connections contacts somehow. But this is a wrong term because all those human beings on the Earth, usually scientists, do not have the slightest idea or knowledge that your impulses will point them to certain things and insights. The questions. What do you call these impulse connections, and how many such impulse connections are there on the Earth?
These impulse connections, as you call them, are actually not to be classified under contacts, because contacts can only be called as such if both parties of a one-sided or mutual communication are fully aware of this. If, however, it is only a one-sided impulse connection, then the person receiving the impulse has no idea that something is transmitted to them, as is the case in every single case with the human beings on the Earth to whom we send impulses and whose number is currently moving at 31,104, so that you realize that there are many more of them than when you last inquired about them. But now to answer your question completely, we call these impulse connections simply impulse attachment, because we truthfully only add impulses to that which is present in every human being in every thought, idea, and impulse good of personal form. In each individual case, our impulses are coordinated to this end in such a wise that the recipient never recognizes the foreign influence, so that such a person could never speak or recognize that he or she receives any impulses from outside of themselves.
That would answer my question, but another question remains unanswered. Why do the many human beings on Earth who claim to have contact with you play Aaron? I mean, why do these crazy ones claim to have contact with you play Aaron?
We have been following this question a long time ago and found the reason in the fact that light attracts moths, as human beings say on Earth.
Aha, that is what I thought. It could not have been otherwise.
You understand very well what I mean, but I have to raise the question of whether others will also understand this when they will read the lines later, when you have written down our conversation.
You mean that your words could not be understood, although they express very clearly what I wanted to have answered with my question. But if it is really the case that it will not be understood, then I want to translate it, after which you can correct me if I have explained something incorrectly. The saying that light attracts moths, that is indeed common all over the world. And with that phrase, your answer says so much that the mischievous moths appear wherever a light illuminates the darkness, and that these moths then fly against the light until they go blind or fatally burn themselves from it. In other words, it also says that where the truth is, there is also a lot of pernicious riffraff that accumulates and brings such long falsehoods, lies and deception, and thus run against the truth until the whole of the riffraff breaks their necks, because they can penetrate just as little into the truth and not become one with it, as also the moths that already fall prey to death by the hot radiation outside of the light. Namely, only that light itself is what can penetrate into it unhindered and become one with it. So also, only those human beings can penetrate into the truth and become one with it who are really and truthfully seeking truth, and truthfully loving and willing to live with the truth. But liars and deceivers, as well as charlatans, delusional ones, and self-deceivers, etc., run senselessly and destructively against the truth until they destroy themselves against it.
I knew it. You can explain everything much better than I possibly could have.
Are you once again going for compliments or even praise? You may leave that alone, my friend. But you could give me an answer to another question, if I may harass you further with questions.
Certainly.
You said that in Yugoslavia, the expected fights would not be carried out for the sake of peace and freedom.
That is what I said. Because those groups of human beings who commit militant actions are not those who are truly fighting for freedom or for peace. But solely they will only wage war for the sake of war, to kill, to murder, and to destroy. Therefore, the warlike actions and destruction will be much worse than they would be in a real war. The destruction will reach totality, and the murders will not stop at innocent ones, young or old. Old and young, women and children, aged and infants, will die thousands of multiple and shameful deaths just because the degenerate combat addicts will indulge in their boundless bloodlust and know no mercy or humanity. The combat addicts have been bloodthirsty and murderous since time immemorial, and that is exactly what they will live out in the time to come.
Bad, very bad. The innocent can still expect a lot of evil.
Unfortunately, this will be so.
Then I will document the coming with newspaper articles. But another question that has nothing to do with Yugoslavia. Urk, as you said, is the name of an ancient dead man who will be found in the Ötztal in the Austrian mountains. Do you know anything about whether the scientists will recognize his age, and also whether they will find out how long Urk will have been there? I ask because Quetzal once explained that very precise old analyses with the conventional methods available to Earth humans are very doubtful.
The man was 37 years, 8 months, and 17 days old, and he died 505 years ago. I told you already. Your assumption is correct. However, that the time of his death is incorrectly calculated by the inadequate and erroneous methods of age determination of materials of every kind, because atomic changes occur when a certain sum of years is exceeded, before which most plants and materials on Earth have changed so much due to cosmic radioactive influences that, through the radiocarbon method, false results up to well over 1,000 years in the age determination occur when the content of radioactive carbon is measured. Depending on the level of radioactive carbon, more or less, depending on whether the substance to be examined is younger or older than 1,000 years, or older than some more than 2,600 years, which will appear in the case of Urk, whereby the earthly scientist will actually obtain a false result in the age determination, which should amount to about 50 to 70 years.
If I understand correctly, then age determinations can be made very precisely with the radiocarbon method up to an age of 1,000 years. According to which then for the next 1,600 years a somewhat stable result can be achieved. According to which then, however false results of up to 1,000 years can appear. So something more than after an age of 2,600 years upwards, because cosmic radioactive influences change the atomic or radioactive structures of the earthly, organic, and other materials.
That was the meaning of my explanation.
Perhaps it was explained a little bit complicatedly, which could lead to misunderstandings, which the human being of the earth, unfortunately, falls for only too quickly. Now, I still have another question regarding Pearl Harbor, respectively in regard to the dropping of the atom bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You said that the Americans had thereby toyed with the idea that, then on the 7th of December 1941, the Japanese, unhindered and without defense, could attack and destroy the ships of the American Pacific Fleet lying in harbor, to thereby have a basis to annihilate Japanese cities with atom bombs, and thereby, on the one hand, to be able to carry out necessary tests on living and dead objects, and on the other hand, to demonstrate military power. However, now there is a worm somewhere in your explanation, because at the time that Pearl Harbor was bombarded flat, there were still no atom bombs. To my knowledge, the Americans officially launched the first atom bomb tests first in the month of July 1945 in the air, some 3 weeks before Hiroshima was annihilated, so the first atomic explosive therefore exploded in about the middle of July, or was even permitted to be detonated. To my knowledge, it was a uranium bomb, like that which was dropped on Hiroshima, while Nagasaki was destroyed with a plutonium bomb. Herbe, it would also be important to finally know how high the number of the actual dead at that time was, which must be accounted for, as the assertions of the Americans, and so forth, which speak of 260,000 dead for Hiroshima and 75,000 in Nagasaki, cannot be given any credibility at all. These are indeed numbers that do not accord with the truth. The bombs corresponded at that time to about 20 kilotons of TNT, if I remember correctly. However, today these sorts of bombs are supposed to correspond to 100,000 kilotons of TNT.
I see already that I must give you some further explanations, even though I actually did not plan on that. Naturally, your statements are true, and also you are naturally correct with your peculiar worm. The first atomic explosive device was detonated by the Americans on July 16, 1945, on the Alamogordo testing grounds in the United States of America. Nevertheless, the American scientists and all the responsible ones of the government already knew. However, at the beginning of the year 1941, that somewhere around the middle of the year 1945, the nuclear weapon test, regarding the first bomb capable of being detonated, would be ready to the extent that the first attempt could be carried out, which indeed then also actually took place at the intended time, and succeeded. And what could be easier for the Americans than to immediately further test these A-bombs on suitable objects, as it had been already determined 5 years before? To that end, it only thus needed the suitable objects, which had been decided 5 years earlier would be destroyed, as it could be thereby reckoned that the first atom bomb test would succeed in the year 1945. Japan was, for one such further test of atomic weapons, as good as done, because the Japanese were, for the Americans, in many kinds of regards, still quite discomforting and also a potential danger. Therefore, it only now depended on one being able to enter into a war activity with the Japanese in order to bring them to their knees at a given time with the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, if the atom bombs were developed so far that they could be employed. Thus the Americans began drawn-out negotiations with the Japanese and made demands which the Japanese could not fulfill under any circumstances and which therefore could not be accepted. Quite the contrary. The American demands on Japan were fully consciously directed in that the Japanese had to say no to this, and that as a final answer, they could only defend their honor with a war attack. So it came to be that the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor succeeded, and that the Americans offered no defense. Had the Americans namely stopped the attack, then that would have meant the quick end of Japan, whereby the entire plan for the future bombardment of the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki would have fallen through, and indeed precisely for that time when the atom bomb was then developed. So the Americans, therefore, constructed a 5-year plan: let the Japanese attack and destroy Pearl Harbor, and sacrifice thousands of humans, thus finding a way to enter the Second World War themselves, which they also still wanted on other grounds, and configured everything so that America, in every respect, became the world's greatest power. A position that was already striven for in the last century by America, who also today and into the future will still try to maintain it with every evil means.
I am satisfied with this answer. It completes my picture of the events. But my questions are not over yet, because I have not seen you for such a long time. So many questions arose. A further question would therefore be of that relating to that asteroid, which is to penetrate next year into the Earth. However, no concerns, because I do not want to ask you what will result from it for the Earth and the human beings, because you will probably not be allowed to answer that in official form. What you can certainly answer, however, is the question of whether this asteroid does not carry further and smaller asteroids or meteors with it in its wake and in its tow. After that I ask, because I know from your teachings during my great journey, that larger asteroids and large meteors, which are already part of the Adonis group, very often do not just race through the world's space, but are often accompanied by smaller meteors or asteroids, which pull them behind them almost like in a tow, while other smaller meteors rush ahead of the large ones, as if they were pushed by the large asteroid or meteors. The distances, so I can remember your explanations, which are of the smaller meteors from the larger ones, can often be very large and even millions of kilometers. If this is actually the case, that this is also true for this giant meteor or asteroid, which is expected in 1992, then next year a lot of things will be coming to the Earth.
Of which you are unfortunately right. It is not that I am not allowed to talk about it, but it just seems better to me if I do not say too much about it. It should not be the case that human beings on the Earth panic. And moreover, the coming events in this context are not yet completely determined, because different factors are yet open, which can cause decisive changes. But I will explain this much, that already in the month of November, companions that are far ahead of the giant comet reach the immediate vicinity of the Earth, and that these events will be repeated several times. It will not be completely harmless, but not in such a manner that something really happens. However, I do not want to give any further information about it officially. If you are interested personally and only for yourself, then I can give you some explanations after our official conversation.
Actually, I am not very interested. What I wanted to know you explained to me. Maybe it would be interesting to know if you know where the meteor and its companions come from.
That is no secret. With the exception of the main meteorite. The meteorites, most of which have a diameter between a few centimeters up to about 25 meters, are rare traveling meteors, which have a very, very extensive orbit around the Sun, and which often need many hundreds of years before they approach the Sun again, whereby they usually also cross the orbit of the Earth. We could not clarify their origin very precisely, because it is possible that they come from the system of Uranus, as they are remnants of the planet Malona, but also from the two outermost ring systems. The latter seems to be much more probable, because the age of most of the meteorites of this cluster coincides with the structures there, and their materials are also of the same kind. But if these wandering meteors came from the surroundings of Uranus, then the materials would have to be younger. But one thing I can say for sure is that this meteor group did not go on its journey through the destruction of the planet Malona, but that the wandering planet destroyer was the triggering factor. From now on, it was 8 destroyer passes ago when this traveling planet got into the area of the asteroid belt and catapulted several small asteroids out of it. These, however, gradually got further and further away from the destroyer until, after almost 1,600 years, they finally became independent and took their own path, which they have followed ever since and which leads them again and again to the sun and into the vicinity of Earth.
Thanks for the information. Then another question. Can you explain to me whether all habitable planets have cavities in which gas, water, or oil are deposited in the interior?
Of course, that is actually the case.
And do these water, gas, and oil chambers have a certain function for the Earth? Or are they simply normal deposits that have no significance for the existence of the planet? Water and oil chambers are often gigantic underground lakes, or even oceans, and gas chambers are gigantic cavities.
The often gigantic natural planetary storage containers on the interior filled with water or gas or with petroleum are created in the course of the development of the planet. This begins quite early in the early stages of the biological transformation of fauna and flora. Each planet creates cavities in the interior in which water, bacteria, gases, etc. can be deposited, which then serve a specific purpose for the planet. The cavities filling up over millions of years serve the evolutionary world as an important safety factor against impacts and shocks of meteors, asteroids, etc., the filled water lakes and oceans, as well as the oil lakes and oceans inside the Earth, serve as shock absorbers, absorbing, damping, and neutralizing the massive impact shocks, ensuring that the planet is not torn to pieces by the tremendous forces and vibrations, as well as shocks, etc., of the impacting meteors or asteroids.
Then the oil exploitation, natural gas exploitation, and groundwater exploitation fabricated by the Earth humans means a hellish danger for the Earth. If the shock-absorbing groundwater lakes and groundwater seas, as well as the gas chambers and oil lakes and oil seas are empty, then the Earth might be able to strike meteors and asteroids and their earthly impacts, vibrations and shocks, etc. The result is that there is a danger that the outer mantle of the Earth will tear open and the bubbling magma will swell up, or that the Earth will even be torn to pieces by the unimaginable giant forces.
You have explained exactly what can threaten the Earth through the irresponsible carelessness of all those who are ruthlessly and irresponsibly exploiting the health and safety of the Earth. Maybe now I should tell you something about future events again, because through your many questions I could not explain anything to you about this anymore, apart from the fact that some things have come up as a result of your questions in this respect. So I want to continue in my explanations where new things will arise around Mikhail Gorbachev. As I have already explained to you before, the Soviet Union as such will disintegrate, whereby the individual states will become independent. But this is not the merit of Gorbachev, but the fault of Boris Yeltsin, who will do everything in his greed for power to push Mikhail Gorbachev out of his office in order to be the great man himself. So he will also work towards making another Union alliance a reality, which will then call itself the Minsk Union, which will take place between the 8th and 12th of December this year. This Minsk Union will emerge from an alliance of a sovereign union of states which will be considered for the first time and for which it will be envisaged that it will be called Union of Sovereign States. The formation of the Minsk Union in the then-dissolved former Soviet Union will be a great source of danger for the peace sought by Gorbachev, and the threat of war in the whole of Europe and the whole world will rise again. Unfortunately, it is not yet possible to predict and fathom out what Boris Yeltsin's guilt will be in the new union organization, purely in terms of calculations and combinations. The way things look, however, the overall political and military situation could again deteriorate extremely sharply, with the danger of nuclear weapons threats also growing again. A fact that could not have found its justification if all of Mikhail Gorbachev's plans had been realized. Due to Boris Yeltsin's megalomaniacal and power-hungry appearance and actions, however, the entire situation will deteriorate again and get very, very deeply into the negative realm. The fact that Emmanuel's 2,000-year prophecy has changed in some respects as a result of the change in human consciousness and responsibility, including in the relationship that the oil fires will rage only a third of the predicted time, is only a small consolation when one considers that through the guilt of the megalomaniac Yeltsin, the prophecies of the negative events are still being fulfilled or are threatening to be fulfilled again.
Too bad. But perhaps there is still a turn for the better, because prophecies do not necessarily have to be fulfilled when one thinks of the better and changes to the positive. This is well known, but to a certain extent the prophecies are always fulfilled, as you yourself have just said, with the fact that the oil fires in Kuwait will burn for a long time, even if not for 1,000 days, as the prophecy says, but about a third of this time, which will be due to it, that human beings have in many respects evolved and improved themselves, and have also made such progress in technology that they counteract the negative in a positive wise, whereby only a part of the prophecy is fulfilled, as it is written in the Talmud Emmanuel. But this is a visible and unmistakable sign that it is indeed true when it is said that prophecies are always, and in any case, changeable and can be turned to the positive if man endeavors to evolution according to the law of creation. Prophecies, which have been explained again and again since time immemorial, are interpreted in such a manner that they do not have to be fulfilled if humanity, contrary to the prophecy, breaks out of its lethargy, its indifference and its irresponsibility, and begins to steer and handle everything correctly and correctly. This is in contrast to foresight, in which nothing can be changed anymore, because it is of a certain form, and it comes about to such an extent that future and inevitable events will be seen in the future, through visions, for example, or through other possibilities, of which there are several.
That is correct.